way because of the distance saved instead of going around Africa. Let's try this. The ships were given the nickname The two German ships were the only Have you ever thought about how long the world's longest traffic jam was? If you guessed that it was in days or months, you're wrong. It lasted for years, 8 years to be specific. And if you thought it was on land, think again. It was on water in the Suez Canal for 8 years, 3 months, and 5 days. There were 15 ships stranded in the Great Bitter Lake. The ships were given the nickname Yellow Fleet because of the yellow desert sand that coated the ships. Of the 15 ships on the journey, there were 4 British, 2 Poland, 2 German, 2 Swedish, 2 American, 1 French, 1 Czechoslovakia, and 1 Bulgarian. The Suez Canal was a very important waterway because of the distance saved instead of going around Africa. It reduces the distance by 8,900 kilometers, also known as 4,900 miles, and it also takes 10 days off of traveling, which results in saving lots of money for the fuel and the crew's salary. Earlier in 1967, Israel and Egypt were getting ready for war. On June 5, 1967, 15 ships began their 12-hour journey through the Suez Canal. But instead of 12 hours, the trip took 8 years. They were halfway into the canal when the war started. Israel launched a surprise air attack on Egypt, obliterating the aircraft runway and aircrafts of Egypt. The Egyptians didn't want Israel taking control of the canal, so they filled the canal with debris and millions of mines so it was unusable, and using it was a suicide mission. The ships were trapped with no hope of escaping, since both exits were blocked. The 14 ships were anchored in the Great Bitter Lake until further notice. After just 6 days of fighting, Israel had conquered the Sinai Peninsula. The border between Israel and Egypt was now the Suez Canal. For the next 8 years, ships were forced to go around Africa, which took longer and was more expensive. When it became obvious that they were going to be trapped for a while, after 5 months, in October, the officers of the 14 ships agreed to create the informal Great Bitter Lake Association. A British ship hosted soccer matches, church services on the German ship, movie nights on the Bulgarian ship, and the Swedish ship had a pool. The next year, in 1968, the ships held their own version of the Olympics, the Bitter Lake Olympic Games, at the same time as the Mexico City Games. By 1969, they developed a plan to let most of the crew go home. They decided to cluster the ships up into 3 groups. Each group would have a small caretaker group made up of 10 crew members and rotated out every 3 months. In 1973, all-out war exploded. The ships were once again trapped between 2 hostile armies with no escape. But this time the Egyptians were the ones to launch the surprise attack with Syria at the north. But after 6 long years, with the help of the Sea Spider Agreement, there was peace. The Suez Canal was a ship graveyard and was a puddle of mines. It took Egypt 2 years to clean the Suez Canal. In 1975, the Suez Canal opened again, and the ships were all free to leave. But sadly, one of the American ships was accidentally sunk by an Israeli rocket in 1973. The 2 German ships were the only ships able to sail out of the canal on their own power. When the German ship SS Münsterland finally arrived at Hamburg, it had completed a voyage that had lasted 8 years, 3 months, and 5 days. That was the 8-year-long worst traffic jam in history. The Great Bitter Lake Association was hopeful for all the ships that were trapped in the Suez Canal. The Sea Spider Agreement was very important, since it made Egypt and Israel stop fighting and let Egypt clean the canal. Without the canal, other countries would have been facing hard times, paying extra for transportation and getting goods. But once Egypt cleaned the canal up, countries would be able to thrive again. Plus, after the war, Israel returned the entire Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt.